The Zorvan flagship hung in the void like a predator lurking in ambush, its sleek angular design a testament to millennia of warfare. Inside, the air was thick with tension as Captain Varlix paced before the war room's massive holographic display. His claws tapped a restless rhythm against the polished floor, echoing faintly in the cavernous chamber. The human delegation's transport shuttle had just docked, and Varlix was less than impressed. Their ambassador, a single unarmored representative, was already making his way aboard. No protective exosuit, no visible shield generators, not even the faint hum of a personal deflection field. It was absurd. Humans were new to the Galactic Concord, and their reputation as resourceful but fragile creatures preceded them. Yet here they were, sending a single, soft-skinned emissary into the heart of an alien warship. "Fools," Varlix muttered under his breath. At his side, Lurix, a young Zorvan officer freshly promoted to adjutant, fidgeted with a data slate. His carapace still gleamed with the sheen of recent molting, a sign of inexperience. Lurix glanced up hesitantly. "Captain, humans are said to possess unconventional methods. Perhaps—" "Unconventional methods do not stop plasma fire, Lurix," Varlix snapped. "Or clawed beasts, or antimatter rounds." "Of course, Captain. It's just— They are said to have defeated the Krell swarms without deploying planetary-scale weaponry." Varlix snorted, his mandibles clicking in irritation. "Luck. Statistical anomalies. Nothing more. The Krell underestimated them, as we might, if we allow ourselves such indulgences." The adjutant fell silent, cowed. Varlix resumed his pacing, his mind spinning with calculations and contingencies. He disliked unknown variables, and humans were nothing if not an enigma. Their biology was unremarkable, no armor plating, no redundant organ systems, no bioelectric fields. Yet somehow they had risen from a backwater world on the galactic fringe to become pivotal players in the Concord. It was infuriating. The chamber's doors slid open with a hiss, and the human stepped inside. He was tall for his species, his skin pale with faint freckles dotting his face and arms. His clothing, a simple gray jumpsuit, offered no indication of combat preparedness. He carried no visible weapons, though his stride was confident, almost casual. His face was split by a wide, toothy grin that Varlix found unsettling. "Ambassador Jonas Ward," the human said, his voice warm but firm. He extended a hand, palm open, in what the Zorvan databanks identified as a gesture of greeting. Varlix ignored the gesture, his gaze raking over the human with thinly veiled disdain. "You are unarmored," he said, his voice a low growl. "Why?" Jonas didn't seem fazed. He shrugged lightly, his grin unwavering. "Not really necessary, is it?" "Not necessary?" Varlix's mandibles clicked audibly as he struggled to contain his irritation. "You walk into a potential combat zone without even basic protective measures. Is this arrogance or ignorance?" Jonas chuckled, an infuriatingly human sound that seemed to imply both amusement and dismissal. "Neither," he said. "We're just built differently." Varlix's claws curled into fists, his frustration mounting. Humans were not built differently, they were built wrong by every standard of galactic warfare, yet here this one stood, unscathed, unbothered, and maddeningly smug. The captain turned sharply, gesturing for Jonas to follow. "This way," he barked. "Let us see how your differences hold up in the simulation." The war room's central holographic display flickered to life, casting an eerie blue light across the chamber. A simulated planetary colony appeared, surrounded by jagged mountains and dense forests. Above it, swarms of alien invaders descended, massive, multi-limbed creatures bristling with plasma cannons and serrated claws. Their numbers were overwhelming, their firepower devastating. "This is a Class 5 combat scenario," Varlix said, his voice cold and clinical. high intensity. Hostile forces are relentless, with a 98% probability of overrunning the colony. Survival without strategic retreat is unlikely. Jonas crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. Sounds fun. Fun? Lurix echoed, his antennae quivering in disbelief. Varlix turned sharply to the human. This is not a game, Ambassador. It is a test of your species' competence. Your participation is permitted, but do not expect us to intervene when your unconventional methods fail. Jonas gave a lopsided grin. Noted. The simulation began. The holographic invaders surged forward, their plasma cannons lighting up the darkened chamber with bursts of deadly energy. The Zorvan officers took their positions, erecting energy barriers and firing precise volleys of plasma bolts. Meanwhile, Jonas stepped out into the open, completely unprotected. What's he doing? Lurix hissed, his voice tinged with panic. He'll be vaporized. Let him seal his fate, Varlix growled. Perhaps then we will understand the limits of their hubris. The first plasma bolt struck Jonas squarely in the chest. The Zorvans collectively flinched, expecting the human to crumple into a smoldering heap. But Jonas didn't fall. He didn't even flinch. He looked down at his chest, brushing away a faint scorch mark on his jumpsuit. He muttered. That tickled. Varlix's mandibles hung open in disbelief. Impossible. That was a direct hit. Jonas didn't respond. Instead, he launched himself at the nearest holographic invader, his movements deceptively quick. His fist connected with the creature's torso, and the force of the impact shattered it into pixelated debris. Another invader lunged at him, its claws raking across his exposed arm. The Zorvans winced, but the attack barely tore his jumpsuit. Jonas grabbed the creature by the neck and slammed it into the ground with enough force to shatter its limbs. The battle was over in minutes. Jonas stood alone amidst the wreckage, his breathing steady, his expression calm. The holographic invaders were gone, their simulated remains scattered like ashes in the wind. See, Jonas said, dusting off his hands. Told you armor wasn't necessary. The chamber was silent. Varlix stared at the human, his mind racing to make sense of what he had just witnessed. No species, not even the war-hardened Zorvans, could survive plasma fire unprotected. And yet, this human had done so with infuriating ease. How? Varlix demanded, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. What are you made of? Carbon alloy? Adaptive nanites? Jonas tilted his head, his grin returning. Not quite. We're just human. That is not an answer, Varlix snapped. Your physiology, your lack of defenses, it defies logic. Jonas leaned casually against the edge of the table, his expression thoughtful. Fragile? He said, almost to himself. Nah. We're resilient. There's a difference. Varlix's claws twitched. Resilient? That plasma blast should have incinerated you. Jonas shrugged. Our biology's weird like that. Our cells dissipate energy in ways most species don't. It's not perfect, but it's enough to keep us standing when others would fall. Lurix stepped forward hesitantly, his antennae quivering with curiosity. And your strength? Your speed? Those are not traits of a fragile species. Adrenaline, Jonas replied simply. When things get hairy, our bodies push past limits that'd kill most other species. It's not just biology, though. It's stubbornness. We don't like giving up. Ever. The Zorvan officers exchanged uneasy glances. Varlix felt a cold knot of unease forming in his gut. He had planned to use the humans as cannon fodder in the Alliance, a disposable resource to shield his own troops from the brunt of the coming war. But now, he realized, humans were far from expendable. They were the ultimate survivors, their unassuming appearance hiding a terrifying resilience. Jonas pushed off the table and made his way to the door. Before he left, he turned back, his grin replaced by a steely gaze. "Next time, Captain," he said, his voice low and measured. "Don't mistake kindness for weakness. We're on your side. For now. But if you think we're soft, well, let's just say you wouldn't like us when we're angry." The doors slid shut behind him, leaving the Zorvins in stunned silence. For the first time in his career, Captain Varlix felt truly vulnerable. He had always trusted in his armor, his weapons, his strategies, but now, faced with the indestructible enigma of humanity, he realized that no amount of preparation could protect him from the unknown. The silence in the war room lingered long after Jonas Ward had left, his unsettling words echoing in Varlix's mind. The captain found himself pacing again, his claws clicking against the polished floor. His adjutant Lurix had not moved, his antennae twitching nervously as he stared at the holographic battlefield, still littered with the simulated wreckage left behind by the human ambassador. "Defies logic," Varlix muttered, his voice a low growl. "No biological structure can withstand plasma fire unprotected. No organic body should generate that kind of raw power." "Perhaps their biology isn't fully organic," Lurix suggested, his tone hesitant. "What if they've enhanced themselves with cybernetic implants, or some kind of molecular reinforcement?" Varlix stopped mid-stride, turning to face his adjutant. "If that were true, there would be evidence. Our scans detected no such augmentations, no nanites, no synthetic tissues, no advanced tech embedded in his physiology." "Then what?" Lurix asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What makes them like this?" The captain didn't answer. Instead, he stared at the now dormant display, his mind churning. Humans were becoming more than just an enigma. They were a threat. Not an immediate one, perhaps, but a potential danger lurking beneath the surface of their apparent friendliness. Their reputation for adaptability, for surviving the impossible, was no longer just a rumor. It was a reality, one that could disrupt the fragile balance of power in the galactic conquest. Varlix's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "Send for the science officers. I want a full analysis of the simulation logs, every movement, every impact, every anomaly. I want to understand how that human accomplished what he did." Lurix saluted quickly and scurried away, eager to escape the captain's brooding presence. Alone, Varlix turned his thoughts inward. This alliance with humanity had seemed straightforward at first, a way to bolster the Zorvin fleet's numbers with disposable troops from a new and eager member species. But now, the plan felt precarious, as though he had invited a predator into his den without realizing it. Hours passed before the science officers arrived, their bulbous eyes glowing faintly in the dim light of the war room. They carried data slates and portable analysis modules, their segmented limbs moving with precision as they began reviewing the simulation logs. Varlix watched silently, his claws drumming against the edge of the table. One of the officers, a particularly meticulous Zorvin named Drevek, spoke first. "Captain, initial findings suggest a combination of factors contributed to the human's performance." "Explain," Varlix demanded. Drevek tapped at his data slate, projecting a series of graphs and charts onto the central display. "The human's tissue composition appears ordinary at first glance. Typical carbon-based rotary structures, no extraordinary density or reinforcement. However, upon closer inspection, there are anomalies in the way their cells dissipate energy. Plasma energy, which would normally cause catastrophic damage to most organic matter, is distributed across the human's body in a way that minimizes localized destruction." "Distributed?" Varlix repeated, his mandibles clicking in frustration. "How?" "Unknown," Drevek admitted. "It could be a natural adaptation, though it is unlike anything observed in other species. Additionally, the human's nervous system shows evidence of heightened pain tolerance and an unusual ability to suppress shock responses. This allows them to continue functioning under conditions that would incapacitate most beings." "And their strength?" Varlix asked, his voice sharp. How does a species without natural armor or enhanced musculature crush a Class 5 holographic invader with a single blow? Drivex hesitated, his antennae twitching nervously. That appears to be a combination of adrenaline and biomechanical leverage. Humans have an uncanny ability to override their physical limitations in high-stress situations, a phenomenon they call a fight-or-flight response. It temporarily enhances their strength and speed, though it comes at a significant cost to their bodies. Varlex's claws stilled as he processed this information. Humans were not indestructible, not in the way he had first feared. Their resilience was real, but it was also dangerous in a different way. They could push themselves beyond their limits, achieving feats that seemed impossible, but such efforts were unsustainable. They were not invincible. They were desperate survivors, willing to destroy themselves if it meant overcoming the odds. And yet he stood unscathed after the simulation, Varlex said, his voice laced with suspicion. You're telling me that Human burned through his reserves, and we saw no sign of it? Drivex nodded reluctantly. It's possible that his recovery was quicker than expected. Humans are known for their remarkable ability to heal and adapt, even from severe injuries. Their biology prioritizes survival above all else, often at the expense of long-term stability. The captain's mandibles clicked in thought. This new understanding of humanity painted a clearer picture, but it also raised more questions. If humans were willing to push themselves to the brink of destruction for survival, what would they do if cornered, if provoked? Continue your analysis, Barclays ordered. I want every possible weakness cataloged and understood. As the science officers resumed their work, Lurix returned, his expression uneasy. Captain, the human ambassador is requesting another meeting. Another meeting, Varlex growled. What does he want now? SE wishes to discuss strategies for improving Zorvan-human combat coordination, Lurix said, his voice trembling slightly. He insists it will be mutually beneficial. The captain's mandibles spread in a grim approximation of a smile. Very well. Let us see what insights this indestructible human has to offer. Jonas Ward was already seated when Varlex arrived in the meeting chamber. The human ambassador looked as relaxed as ever, his hands resting casually on the table. His expression was warm and open, but Varlex had learned not to trust that smile. It hid too much. Captain, Jonas said, nodding in greeting, thanks for meeting me on such short notice. Varlex took his seat across from the human, his posture rigid. You said you wished to discuss combat coordination. Elaborate. Jonas leaned forward, his smile widening slightly. Well, after that simulation, it occurred to me that our species approach combat very differently. You Zorvans are methodical, disciplined, and reliant on your advanced tech. It's impressive, but it's also predictable. Predictable, Varlex repeated, his mandibles flaring in irritation. Our strategies have been refined over millennia. They are efficient. Efficient, sure, Jonas agreed, his tone amiable. But efficiency doesn't always win battles. Sometimes you need to be unpredictable, adaptable. You need to throw out the rule book when the situation demands it. And you believe humans excel in this chaos? Varlex asked, his tone skeptical. Jonas's grin turned sly. I believe it's one of our strengths, yeah. We don't have the luxury of natural armor or fancy energy shields, so we had to learn to think on our feet, improvise, exploit weaknesses, and I think that's something we can teach you. The captain studied the human carefully, searching for any hint of deceit. Jonas's words were bold, almost arrogant, but there was an underlying logic to them. The simulation had proven that humans were capable of achieving the impossible, even if their methods were unorthodox. And what would you gain from teaching us? Varlex asked, his tone wary. Humans rarely offer something for nothing. Jonas's expression softened, his grin fading into a more serious demeanor. Look, Captain, I get it. You don't trust us yet, and that's fair, but the truth is we're on the same side here. The conquered needs to stand united against the threats we're facing, and that means working together. If we can help you become more adaptable, more flexible, then it strengthens all of us. Barlix's claws tapped against the table as he considered the human's words. There was no denying that the conquered faced formidable enemies, species and forces that sought to destabilize the fragile alliance. If humanity's unconventional methods could give the Zorvans an edge, it might be worth the risk. Very well, Varlix said at last. You may proceed with your proposal. But understand this, human. If your methods prove detrimental to my forces, there will be consequences. Jonas nodded, his smile returning. Understood, Captain. Let's get started. Zorvan training grounds aboard the flagship were a sprawling, meticulously designed simulation arena. Its walls shimmered with the faint glow of adaptive holographic emitters capable of recreating virtually any environment, from barren wastelands to dense urban sprawls. The air was charged with the hum of advanced technology, a constant reminder of the Zorvan military's precision and superiority. Captain Varlix stood near the observation platform, his mandibles clicking softly as he watched the preparations below. Jonas Ward was already in the arena, surrounded by a mix of Zorvan soldiers and combat drones. The human ambassador had insisted on participating in the training exercise himself, much to Varlix's growing irritation. Lacks discipline, Varlix muttered to Lurix, who stood at his side. No armor, no weapons, no sense of structure, and yet he insists on leading these drills. Urix's antennae twitched nervously. Perhaps it is part of their unpredictability, Captain. Humans seem to thrive on chaos. Chaos is not a strategy, Varlix growled. It is a liability. The adjutant wisely chose not to argue further. Instead, he watched as Jonas gestured to the assembled soldiers, his voice carrying easily across the arena. All right, listen up, Jonas called out, his tone casual but firm. We're going to run a scenario where your usual tactics won't work. The goal here isn't just to win, it's to learn how to adapt on the fly. Trust me, when you're out there in the real fight, things aren't going to go according to plan. The Zorvan soldiers exchanged uncertain glances. Their rigid training emphasized precision and adherence to established protocols, leaving little room for improvisation. Jonas's approach was alien to them, and their discomfort was palpable. I will monitor this closely, Varlix said, narrowing his multifaceted eyes. If his methods jeopardize my troops, I will end this exercise immediately. Down below, Jonas continued, unperturbed by the skepticism around him. First rule, stay flexible. If something isn't working, change it. Second rule, don't assume the enemy is going to play fair. And third rule, most important, don't be afraid to take risks. Got it? The soldiers hesitated, their mandibles twitching in confusion. One finally raised a claw. Ambassador Ward, Zorvan strategy emphasizes minimizing risk. It ensures survival and maximizes efficiency. Sure, Jonas replied, nodding. But sometimes survival means doing something crazy, something unexpected, like this. Without warning, Jonas darted toward one of the combat drones, his movements startlingly quick. The drone reacted instantly, its plasma cannon humming to life. Before it could fire, Jonas dropped into a roll, coming up behind the machine and slamming his fist into its control panel. Sparks flew as the drone sputtered and collapsed. The soldiers stared, their antennae quivering in disbelief. Vest, Jonas said, dusting off his hands, is what I mean by taking risks. You can't always rely on distance or your tech. Sometimes you've got to get in close and make it personal. The Zorvans exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, a veteran named Krixer, stepped forward, his voice sharp. Your methods are reckless, human. Charging an armed enemy is a strategy for the desperate, not the disciplined. Jonas grinned. Desperation has its uses, Krixer. It makes you unpredictable, and when the enemy doesn't know what you're going to do next, you've got the advantage. The veteran bristled, but before he could respond, the arena's lights dimmed. A synthesized voice announced the start of the simulation, and the environment around them shifted. The smooth floors gave way to uneven terrain, dotted with jagged rocks and the remnants of ruined structures. The air grew thick with the sounds of distant explosions and the crackle of simulated energy weapons. The scenario was simple. The Zorvan team, supported by combat drones, was tasked with defending a critical outpost from waves of attacking forces. Jonas had insisted on participating as a member of the team rather than observing from the sidelines. The first wave of attackers surged forward, holographic constructs resembling Krell swarms, their multi-limbed forms bristling with weapons. The Zorvan soldiers moved in perfect synchronization, erecting energy barriers and firing precise plasma volleys. Their initial defense was flawless, the attackers falling in droves. But then the second wave arrived, larger and more aggressive. The simulated Krell adapted, using cover and flanking maneuvers to exploit gaps in the Zorvan formation. The soldiers faltered, their rigid protocols ill-suited to the evolving threat. "Pull back and regroup," Krixer barked, his mandibles clicking in frustration. "Don't pull back," Jonas shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Push forward, take the fight to them." Krixer hesitated, clearly torn between his instincts and the human's unorthodox suggestion. Before he could respond, Jonas was already charging into the fray. The human moved with astonishing speed and agility, dodging enemy fire and using the terrain to his advantage. He ducked behind a ruined wall, then leapt out to tackle one of the Krell constructs, disabling it with a well-placed strike. The Zorvan soldiers watched in stunned silence as Jonas continued his assault, his every movement a blend of precision and audacity. Slowly, almost reluctantly, some of them began to follow his lead. They abandoned their rigid formation, spreading out and engaging the enemy in smaller, more dynamic groups. To their surprise, the strategy worked. The attacking wave faltered, unable to adapt to the sudden shift in tactics. Varlix watched from the observation platform, his claws gripping the railing. He hated to admit it, but the humans' methods were effective. The Zorvan soldiers were thinking on their feet, responding to the situation rather than blindly following protocol. It was chaotic, yes, but it was also efficient in its own way. The final wave of attackers arrived, the largest and most formidable yet. Massive Krell constructs lumbered into the battlefield, their heavy plasma cannons cutting swathes of destruction through the defenders' ranks. The Zorvans scrambled to respond, their newfound adaptability put to the ultimate test. Jonas was in the thick of it, dodging plasma blasts and directing the soldiers with shouted instructions. "Use the high ground, don't let them pin you down, and if you see an opening, take it." Krixer, finally abandoning his skepticism, rallied his squad and led a flanking maneuver. The soldiers moved with uncharacteristic fluidity, their plasma fire striking weak points in the enemy's armor. Jonas, meanwhile, climbed onto one of the larger constructs, disabling its weapon systems before leaping to safety. When the last Krell fell, the simulation ended, the battlefield dissolving into shimmering light. The soldiers stood amidst the now empty arena, their breathing heavy, but their expressions triumphant. Jonas grinned as he approached the group, clapping Krixer on the shoulder. "Nice work, everyone. You adapted, you took risks, and you came out on top. That's what I'm talking about." Krixer hesitated, his mandibles twitching. "Your methods, they are unorthodox, human, but perhaps there is merit in them?" Jonas laughed. "That's all I ask. A little trust and a little willingness to try something new." From the observation platform, Varlix watched the scene unfold, his emotions a turbulent mix of frustration and grudging respect. He had underestimated the humans, dismissed them as fragile and reckless. But now he saw them for what they truly were, survivors, capable of turning their weaknesses into strengths. As the soldiers filed out of the arena, Jonas turned and looked up at the observation platform, his grin as infuriatingly smug as ever. He raised a hand in a casual salute, as if to say, "See? I told you so." Varlix didn't return the gesture. Instead, he turned away, his mind racing with new questions and possibilities. Humans were not indestructible, not in the way he had once feared, but their resilience, their adaptability, their refusal to give up. Those traits made them more dangerous than any armor or weapon ever could. And if the Zorvans were to survive the coming war, they would have to learn to embrace a little chaos.